bogged down that their vast fighting machine in World War II
Isn't it about the
decimated.
United States, though? Isn't this about the United States?
You know,
go ahead, Mel.
I was just thinking, why don't we put the Middle East in charge of solving the situation in Bosnia? And then that'll get them so distracted. And it's like a whole world.
Is this a distraction for the United States from problems that we should be dealing with at home? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm saying we put the Middle East in charge of solving the situation in Bosnia. Then, so therefore, we solve the situation in the Middle East.
By distracting them from...
they're fully engaged with the situation in Bosnia, and then we get like a whole world peace plan.
Jack, I'm worried you're too quiet. I'm worried about it, Jack. You're pondering. You're listening hard. Go ahead.
Well, yesterday, I had a Bosnian cab driver who took me to a housing project in Brooklyn. And the cab driver said it was all crazy. These hatreds are so deep, no one can ever solve it. And when I got to this poor housing project in Fort Greene, people were saying, send the troops here. We want them to get rid of the drug dealers. So I think you get the two extremes, and I think clearly most people in the country would rather not see this happen. But I think it is clearly going to happen. And I think when you look at the recent history of interventions, they come out ambiguous. The intervention in Haiti, a plus or a minus, Rwanda, Panama. These countries are not, you know, they're ambiguous.
So to back it up a little bit, did the president get too far out on a limb that there was no turning back? Is that
my instinct is that he was just tired of being told he's weak and indecisive, and he threw a dart at a board and said, came out Bosnia, I'll be decisive here.
Well, it also came out about the budget crunch and the government shutdown.
I don't think
I think he's overcompensating for some criticism.
He may be overcompensating rhetorically, but the fact is, and I am not a defender of President Clinton on practically anything except this. And he has had, since the earliest days of the administration, this obligation, if a peace was there, that Americans would send in some forces to help enforce the peace. They did it when you had the so-called, what was it, the Vance-Owen plan that fell apart, and now we have this. Look what's happened since Clinton has intervened forcefully. You had the bombing, that cleared the minds of the Serbs and others there. You had, which got them to come to Dayton, Ohio, of all places,
that was strange.
And agree, the Serbs, the Croats, and the Muslims, to agree on a peace treaty. Now they've gone back there. Look, just because they've had animosities for 500 years, they've had those in the Middle East. Should you not go and try to work something out in the Middle East?
I mean, are the Serbs, the Croats, et cetera, organized enough to have a representative that they respect? I just wonder whether or not anyone who speaks for them makes any difference.
You know, Fred, just help me with this. What do you say to people who are worried about this idea that we're going to send troops there for 1 year and get them out right before the 1996 elections? I mean, doesn't that seem just a little bit artificial to you?
Well, that was purely for domestic consumption. And remember, President Clinton says, I said about a year. He's being very clever on this. And, you know, it might be 15 months, might be, it won't be less. That's for sure.
Colm, something was coming into your mind?
Is it a political move? Is it a political enhancement move on President Clinton's part?
I think it's going to help him politically. I don't think he thinks that. I think they're terrified at the White House that this thing can blow up in their face. After all, you know, you're putting yourself in a situation where you really don't have control of the outcome. You have these crazy Bosnian Serb militias. Who knows what they're going to do? There is the model, and several of you all have pointed to it, Somalia, and there's Lebanon, where American forces were slaughtered and America left, bugged out. I'm sure there's some who think they can repeat that.
Colm, you spent 4.5 years doing Phantom in Canada.
Yeah.
You have a house there.
Yeah.
I gather that's where the kids and your wife are there.
Yes.
Bring a little bit of Canadian perspective to this. How do the Canadians, as you see, or how do people, as you've toured around the world, how do they look at America? How do they see Bill Clinton? How would they interpret what's happening?
Well, I have to say, I'm not saying this in a sort of a cop-out way. We don't really talk politics a lot. We talk about entertainment and so we all have. We have our opinions.
You mean you
as
a family?
Yeah, well, yeah, me personally. I mean, I'm aware of what goes on in the world, naturally enough, and as you say, the comparison between Bosnia and Northern Ireland is there, but we don't discuss politics in depth. We don't look at things in depth.
But do you think that Clinton should send troops to Canada? Just kidding.
To Canada.
I was just thinking about it, yeah.
To stand between the two back closets.
It allows us to entertain them, yeah.
Huh? But now when you...
I don't know, but
You don't...
the Canadian perspective in this,
Do they care? Do they care?
I don't really know, because I don't really talk to people about things like that.
Okay, when you pick up a newspaper and
yeah.
when you pick up a newspaper and say, okay, Ireland,
Sure
divorce,
they do.
divorce, now permitted in Ireland. What does that do? Do you care about that, or not really?
Oh, I do. I mean, I think, yeah, sure.
Why?
Sure,
Why?
yeah. Yeah, I focus on that because I'm from Ireland. Naturally enough, that's my home country, and that's been going on for a long time, and
What
I
does
see a
that
lot of
mean?
suffering going on
What does that mean when the people of Ireland go to the polls and they say divorce is now to be permitted? What does that do to the country?
Well, it is permitted, isn't it?
It is permitted?
Yeah,
Yes.
now, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but what does it mean when they say no, like they did 3 or 4 years ago?
But the Catholic Church now doesn't hold quite the same
That's
position.
what it means.
I mean, there was no
Exactly.
divorce in Ireland
That
until
was
2
against
years
the law.
ago.
No,
Huh?
it was no
Just
legal
now.
divorce.
Legal
So
divorce.
what
You
was
could separate.
happening instead?
You could separate. You could suffer on in silence. That's what you could do.
And then
a
so there
lot
was
of people did.
no
a lot of people
remarriages.
did.
Right.
Tony, why are
Wow.
you smiling
No
over there?
remarriages.
I was smiling what Fred said.
What did Fred say?
Under their suffering in silence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
suffering
Well,
on
look, we've gone the other way here with no fault divorce in the United States,
that's
and
the
people,
other point.
you know, they've
That's
gone.
the other point.
I'm in favor of legal
Right.
divorce, but it ought to be hard to get.
Does that say something about the culture over there?
Yeah, it does. It says
it
something about the
changing?
whole of the Catholic religion on the country. It also, what you just said, Tony, it's very... I think it's swung too far this way, because I think it's too easy to get out of marriage. It's the commitment of marriage is taken very easily over here. That's one thing I have observed in North America. Kids get into marriage, we don't like you, we have a row tomorrow, bang, we're out of it, you know. That's what does happen.
Do you think that's going to happen over there? In time? In time? Is it going to be too easy?
No, I don't think so. It'll take a long time to get to what it's like here.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
But,
right.
although we have some problems here,
yeah,
and could that be
sure.
a symptom of... Did you really take your family up there because you didn't particularly like what was going on in the United States?
Take my family to Canada?
Yeah. In addition
No, I
to
didn't.
doing the show.
There are 2 places I can work in America, and that's New York and L.A. I don't want to raise 4 children in New York, and I certainly don't want to raise them in L.A. In New York, I'd have to be in Connecticut in some fortress surrounded by walls, and it's a very dangerous city, New York. I love New York. I love the vibe in New York, theatrical vibe in New York, but I don't like it to raise a family. I find Toronto is relatively safe, and I say relatively safe, not completely safe. It's a lot safer than New York. It's a lot safer than L.A. And I find, as I said, I came to New York for 2 things, or America for 2 things, and that's good work and good money, and I found them in Toronto. Toronto's just on the verge of becoming a huge theatrical force and a huge artistic force.
Very interesting. We have three folks on the show here, and just listen to the titles. Listen to the titles, and we'll put them up on the screen at the same time. Tony Brown has a book, Black Lies, White Lies: The Truth According to Tony Brown. Lynn Cheney has a book, Telling the Truth: Why Our Culture and Our Country Have Stopped Making Sense and What We Can Do About It. And Don King has a book, Only in America.
That's my book. That's not his book.
I'm sorry.
Really getting into trouble because he wrote this book.
That's a great photo.
Every once in a while,
That photo captures his attitude.
Jack Newfield has a book about Don King, Only in America. Now, all 3 of these books together, for some reason, are knocking around in my brain. They say something about the country. Tony, what's your racism? Obviously, is a big point of what you're talking about in your book, and then you talk about the greed of the country, the moral rot of the country. Could you talk about that?
I think racism is a kind of a part of a trio that I identify as being what I euphemistically call the American predicament. Number 1 is moral rot. Number 2 is economic bankruptcy. And number 3 is a potential racial conflagration between blacks and whites, and they operate in tandem. The race stress is fed by economic decline and moral rot, and vice versa, et cetera, and so forth. I believe that if we don't address these 3 areas seriously before the next century, we will enter the 21st century as a third world country with a greatly reduced standard of living.
Well, we are going to be doing something about the potential of economic bankruptcy, are we not? I mean,
we aren't so far.
Well, aren't the two sides coming together to do something about that?
Well,
I mean,
they say they are, but I mean, 7 years is a lifetime in politics. To say you're going to balance the budget in 7 years, you're going to have new players in 7 years, and they will say 7 years. I don't know why they can't balance the budget in less than 7 years, if they really wanted to. The reason they don't balance the budget is neither party will gore its own friends. They will attack their enemies, but they spare their friends. So all we have is lip service to budget reduction. Clinton, for example, presents the image that he is attacking the deficits. He doesn't attack the deficit. He postpones them until 96 when they will explode, but he guarantees us in his budget plan that he will increase the debt, which is the result of accumulated deficits, by over $1 trillion.
Where's the moral rot? Where's the moral rot?
That's the moral rot.
That's the moral rot?
The moral rot is playing games with the children and the grandchildren, their children, in this society. That's moral rot. For you and I or any other adults to live the way we're living, knowing we're passing the bills to the next generation, is moral rot. For us to have an entitlement process in America, I call it in my book, entitlement socialism, in which out of $800 billion, we spend 14% of that to take people out of poverty. And 25% of the people who receive entitlements earn over $50,000 a year. That's moral rot. That's unfair.
Jack, why do you think that it's so difficult for whites and blacks in this country to get along?
Northern Ireland, Bosnia.
Nobody said it was going to be easy, Jack. I mean,
I think there.
As a resident liberal.
I think there's racism in both communities. There's a history of blacks being denied rights in this country. There's racial polarization in every segment of society, which the country finally saw in the O.J. Simpson jury room, I think. And in the Rodney King jury room. I think there's a million reasons for it, but I think it is one of the deepest and most profound flaws in this country. Myrdal wrote about it in 1940, The American Dilemma. Du Bois wrote about it. It's the color line. I think it's the original sin in the American soul. Going back to the Constitution, where blacks were only 3/5 of a human being, and the whole history of slavery.
Would it surprise you to know that Tony, in his book, talks about blacks being afraid of whites?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all.
Do you think the
whites have economic power, and whites are afraid of blacks in terms of crime, and it's a double.
You know what really struck me about
sword.
the whole? I don't know if this is connected to moral rot per se, but a real big eye-opener for me in a really scary way, I thought, in terms of, like, it dawned on me that there's just a big hole at the center of this culture with nothing in it. Maybe the only thing that this culture seems to have in common is TV shows, was the LA riots, which were, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was like 93. But sitting in my house, looking at what would have been some people I would have done business with somewhere in another part of Los Angeles, happily walking down the street with someone else's washing machine, realizing that the level of disenfranchisement was that big that they were everyone was just flipped out and not even pretending to participate in the culture at the one moment where things broke open. Was really scary. It was like looking at Pandora's box. Suddenly there was like devils at the center of the culture. There was nothing going on in the middle of our culture that held it together. There was nothing there.
I think that's a very provocative thing to put on the table. Is there anything? I was thinking about when I was growing up and how the country was one country and you were taught to be very patriotic and there was the country was important. I don't see the country as being important anymore. I think it's everybody pretty much for themselves. And maybe what Merrill has put on the table, there is an emptiness at the center.
But that's a worldwide problem. That's not just America. That's everywhere.
You think?
Find that in Ireland as well. Absolutely.
What do you think's going on?
I think a lot of it's got to do with what the kids watch and the press, I have to say.
I don't know about that, but
what the kids watch on television. I'm talking about the kids growing up now. I mean, I'm sort of thinking of my dad and his sort of idea of nationalism or his idea of Ireland and then I'm thinking of what my idea, and now my kids, they don't really care. Well, the world has opened up so much too, you know, the global village.
We used to have intellectual leadership in this country, and perhaps in other countries as well, that said that this whole idea of common ground was important, that held up the integrationist ideal, you know, that we needed to find out what we have in common and help make the society work. What's happened is now the intellectual leadership of this country, and I'm specifically talking about colleges and universities, advance the notion instead that we have different realities, depending upon whether we're black or white, depending upon whether we're male or female, that there is no common ground, and that people who try to talk about common ground are somehow pulling the wool over our eyes.
Right.
This is intellectual chicanery as far as I'm concerned, but it is enormously effective. And I think you see throughout the society people beginning to think this way, that you have a different reality depending upon your race, a different reality depending upon your gender. And in fact, this is dumb thinking, but it has been completely influential.
Now, your book, Telling the Truth. What's the truth that's not being told?
Well, the idea is that truth as a goal is now not valued. People used to think that if we had a social problem that we should all sit down together and get to the truth of the matter about what the problem was and try to fix it. Now there's just your reality and my reality, and there's a growing level of irrationality. Did you mention the O.J. Simpson trial?
Yes.
Somebody was talking about it. I mean, I think you saw that there. We might disagree about this, but looks to me like the jury thought it could construct its own version of reality and didn't have to pay a whole lot of attention to standard rules of evidence and verification. I know a lot of people disagree with that. I had a man call me on a radio talk show who did, but he said something so stunning. I asked him, I said, well, look, we aren't going to agree on this, but could we agree it would be wrong to tell the jury to construct this whole different story and to render a verdict about racial justice and police brutality? He said, sure, that would be wrong. And I said, well, then you think what Johnny Cochran did was wrong. He said, Johnny Cochran didn't do that. And I was just stunned, because even though we might disagree about the trial itself, you can't just, that is so verifiable. And we've come to this point where you just don't even have to read what Johnny Cochran said to have a strong feeling about it.
Why is there different levels of reality? Why is that happening?
There aren't. That's the point.
I know there aren't, but why do people think there are?
Well, my favorite...
But they're seeing the same thing from a different angle.
No, but he's saying
why?
Why?
Why is that happening here?
People, of course,
I meant
have
from a different economic, one thing from a different economic perspective.
But it's not a different reality. I mean, the vocabulary has been so debased. It's a different perspective on a reality, on the reality, but it's not a different reality. When you start talking that way, the level of our inability to ever reach any common accord is
So you're saying the rich see things
astronomical.
differently than the poor, is that what you're saying? Is that the type of thing you're...
That is true, but
Men,
that doesn't
women,
mean
black,
there's
white?
not...
Yeah, you just said it. Yeah.
Well, but there's not a different reality for you depending upon whether you're rich or poor. There are different experiences of the same reality.
Does that not change your view and perspective and...
Yeah, well, this is such an interesting conversation because I think the most important point to get across is that, yes, we might have different perspectives, but if the society is to flourish and advance and even be preserved, we have to get beyond our own perspectives and find that
Well, I think what's
common
happening
ground
is
out
that
there.
most of our political leaders are appealing, are doing, I agree with your argument about multiculturalism as I understand it, but I think most of our political leaders are appealing to one group or two groups in the society. And I think where the train went off the tracks is that we had one great leader in this country who did speak in terms of universal humanism to every group, and that was Martin Luther King. And he was assassinated, and I think I date this balkanization of the intellect to appeals to gender, race.
That was an interesting adjective, the balkanization of the intellect.
That's a very nice phrase.
And I think it began after King was
It certainly
killed.
began with the 60s, and that was the King assassination was
I think
an important part
Now,
of
but
it.
what's bothering you? Colm, you had a...
No, I was just going to say, why are politicians appealing for votes? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think the art of politics has become
Okay.
so scientific now
wanted
with
to
polling
confirm
and
what I
focus
thought, yeah.
groups.
But it's
Okay.
spin. You know, we've always had spin.
Basically power, seeking power.
I mean, the Senator Dole gave a speech about what he called, the moral rot in culture. But he only criticized Democrats in the arts. He only criticized black rap performers. He didn't criticize the Rolling Stones or Guns N' Roses or any white groups. He was looking for a Willie Horton of hip-hop
Sure,
to
absolutely.
demonize.
Well, he certainly...
And I
easy
think
example,
everything he said I agreed with.
Yeah.
About Time Warner,
sure,
about
sure,
rap music,
sure.
but it was so skewed
Obvious.
towards one side of the cultural equation. He wouldn't criticize Arnold Schwarzenegger's ultra-violent movies because he's a big...
Huh?
Others have jumped in. Bill Bennett, for one. And,
Oh, yes.
No, I agree. I
jumped
know.
in and
But I'm
daytime
just saying
TV
that-
and these shows, which are mostly white and have
What do you-
white audiences.
What do you think of that film now, that thing, Money Train?
Yeah.
Money
when they
Train?
blew up the toll booth.
Isn't that the most horrible thing?
Well, the violence, you know, I used
Well,
to
the
be-
cops are saying they're not so sure there's an actual connection.
Yeah.
But
They may not, yeah, that's true.
I mean, everyone jumped to a conclusion, and
But didn't it
Wesley
happen?
Snipes
Didn't it
apologized.
happen?
It happened.
It happened. It actually
happened.
happened prior to the movie, and then they copied it in the movie, and then it happened again after the movie.
We're just fooling ourselves if we think that film and television don't affect behavior and
Absolutely.
influence
Couldn't
it.
agree
It's
with
just,
you more.
Didn't the
I agree with
country
you,
start to
Timur.
go?
Saying
Didn't the
they
country
do.
start to
Yeah.
go
I
in a
mean, they
different
criticize
direction
it.
when television came into play? I mean, really? I mean,
Huge
wasn't that
influence.
where it started?
I don't think so. I
You
think,
don't?
No. I think it started going in a different direction after we legalized drugs.
how did we legalize
Where?
drugs?
Where did
Because
we
we don't
legal-
arrest people who buy them.
We don't arrest
No.
people who buy
No,
them?
drugs are legal in the United States. You can use all the drugs you want. As a matter of fact, we'll give you methadone if you want it. It's a substitute for heroin. We tell you to watch what's on the needle, but what's not in the needle.
Yeah, but
AIDS, for example, is being driven by drugs. Crime is being driven by drugs. 70% of the people in prison have committed crimes that are drug-related. Young black men are killing each other at horrendous rates over drug turf. Drugs have destroyed the inner cities. They're not safe, and we do nothing about it. Now, all of these ideas I've heard so far are very intellectual approaches to something that's very mundane. And if we don't do something about drugs in this country, we're going to continue to have and exacerbate the kinds of trends that we already see.
What would you do?
I would arrest people, as I say in my book, who buy drugs. Give them a choice. You go on trial to go to jail, or you go on trial or you choose, rather, to go into rehabilitation.
How are you going to
Therefore,
balance the budget with 500 new prisons?
No, you don't put them in prison. I say you give them a choice to go into rehabilitation. The idea is not to lock these people up. The idea is to arrest their drug
There's a one-year
habits.
waiting list for rehab beds in New York City today.
If you took the money we're spending for prisons and you spent the money to rehabilitate people, number one, building new jails is not going to stop drugs, because as long as a guy can make $1,000 a day, $1,000 a week, he's going to do it. The only way you're going to really arrest drugs or get it under control is to drop demand.
Why do you think crime is going down in all the big cities the last 2
I'm not
years?
sure it's going down in all the big cities. I think statistical reporting is helping it go
They're
down.
not hiding bodies. The murder rate is going down.
Well, maybe the murder rate.
Some kinds
Well,
of,
there's a
some
way to
kind
answer
of
that.
crime is going down.
There's
Some
a
kind of
finite
crime
number
goes
of
down.
people who kill people, and a finite number of people who are associated with them. Maybe that's why it's going down.
Fred?
But I don't think it's going down because drugs are diminishing in this society.
But Tony, what you're saying is to get to the core of the problem, basically. And you
We-
say drugs, what we're talking about is the surface, you're talking about the basis of the problem, which is
I think
drugs.
it's driving. I think drugs is at the core of the societal decline.
Yeah,
We now are seeing police forces, the people we depend on to protect us, they're becoming more and more corrupt. Not just LAPD. They've got a whole bunch of them in Philadelphia, a whole precinct in New York. Wherever you go, they're on the take. These are guys, these are human beings making $12,000, $15,000, $30,000 a year. Guy comes up and gives them $50,000, $100,000. I mean, we can be moralistic about this, but this erodes the social fiber of this society. And we talk around drugs.
What is your answer, though, to the notion that if you legalize the drugs, the guys wouldn't have to kill each other, then the prices would come down, and it wouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't follow.
Well, the notion is that if you have drugs being legal, then they wouldn't be killing each other for drugs.
No, I'm not
and
saying you
therefore-
legalize drugs.
No,
I'm
no,
saying
she's
No, I
saying
mean,
what
what is
should
your
be
answer
argued
to that
there.
argument?
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you...
How do you, go ahead.
Your answer to the argument that if you made drugs legal, then there wouldn't be all the crime attached to it, all the tangential killings of each other in the name of drugs, all the need for the prices to be sky high because it'd be legally regulated, et cetera, et
Well,
cetera.
if you legalize drugs...
Yeah, if you actually legalize
Yeah,
them.
number one, you would admit to your immorality, and number two, you would have a plethora
Well, how
of
is
people
just only
who are
drug
drug
taking
addicts.
immoral?
Now, you
And
would
number
have...
three, the prices aren't that high. That's the crack revolution. It doesn't cost that much. I mean, how are you
You get
going
a
to
hit for
legalize?
$5.
Yeah, how are you going to legalize
all this
crack?
drug
It's a drug
and
that makes
all
people
the-
go
all
out
the,
and commit crimes. It
all
drives
the-
them crazy.
All the alcoholism and the drug addiction in the culture speaks to being symptomatic of a very unhappy society.
Yes.
Very unhappy
And-
society.
yeah, absolutely.
Of course.
Yeah.
What do you mean parts?
I mean parts.
That's why
Parts
people
of-
become addicts.
People who are making...
No, I realize
yeah.
that, but everybody's not an addict. There are a lot of people on drugs. There are a lot of people...
You mean recreational users?
Yeah.
Throw them in jail, too.
Well, I'm not saying, look, there is another problem, although I agree with Tony, basically, there is another problem, and that is the spectacular failure rate of rehabilitation programs. They just don't work. People are off drugs.
Particularly with crack.
Yeah, particularly with crack. They're off drugs during the period where they're locked up in the rehab, and then the moment they get out, they're back.
Addiction.
It's very
What
have
about
an
this
addictive
debate?
personality.
What about this
Yes,
debate
I agree with
that crack is punished more severely than it should be? And
Yeah, but Bro comes along and says, well, up the ante for the powder as well and make them equal.
That's
And
an evasion.
but that was an argument. That was an
That's a
argument.
worthless argument, don't you think, Tony?
Yes, I do. I think if we're going to give value added to sentences for drug crimes, we should give it to people who commit violence in the conduct of drug transactions, not for one form as opposed to the other.
Let me ask Jack. Jack, you've written a book about Don King. Brilliant, ruthless, has done time, is almost a hero to some people.
I hope not.
He is. I mean, as you say, only in America. Why does boxing tolerate him? Why does Tyson have him around? What does that say about the culture?
Tyson is stupid, boxing is unregulated, and Don King is a brilliant intellect.
So, but it's accepted. People just
People
don't.
shrug and say it's only
It's
boxing.
show business.
But it's only.
Show business with blood.
But you say only in America does this
No,
happen.
that's Don King's own signature phrase.
Yeah, but
That's right.
only in America that happens. Is that not right?
That somebody can be so obviously crooked and remain powerful?
That's your thesis. That's your thesis, right?
Yes.
What does it say? I'm asking you, what does it say about the country? Huh?
There's a great movie out now called The Usual Suspects with Gabriel Byrne.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the point of the movie is sometimes the bad guys are just smarter than the good guys. And I
Smarter
think
than.
know how to cover their crimes, insulate their
He's a
crimes.
great Irish actor. I have
Gabriel
to say
Byrne
that,
is.
Jack. Yeah.
And he's written a great book.
Yeah, he's a wonderful
He
guy.
is.
You know him?
Yeah, I've done a
He's
couple
a
shows
really
with him.
nice man.
Super person. But I think that's part of it.
How'd you get mixed up in the boxing business?
I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn where a lot of fighters were coming along. I became friends with Customato and Jose Torres in the early 60s. I became friends with Ali when he got unjustly exiled and became one of his advocates, saying it was an outrage to rob him of the heavyweight championship without due process before his draft evasion case had reached the Supreme Court and was eventually thrown out. And I've always, had an interest in boxing, and it's most of what I write is about government and politics, but it was a great slumming vacation to spend a few years around the boxing business where everybody is a character. There are certain subcultures in America, whether it's boxing or the racetrack or the record industry or the police department, where like everyone you meet is a great personality and a colorful character, and boxing is one of those subcultures.
Did you work at Madison Square Garden for a
I did.
while when you were a kid?
I did.
Way back when?
I
Dropped out of school?
Dropped out of college for a year and worked at Madison Square Garden, which opened my eyes to the corruption of sports.
What do you think when you're watching television nowadays and you're watching a basketball game or a football game or something like that, and somebody turns around and slugs a referee, or there's all this showboating?
Preposterous.
Preposterous.
Yeah.
They usually slug the other players. They don't slug the referee.
Well, I think there was a case recently.
Yeah, but that's, look, there's a lot
Okay.
more violence, particularly in basketball, than there used to be. But it's not the referees. You know, Jack, I once saw Muhammad Ali when he came to Capitol Hill, and he was just making a tour, and he went back. I've never seen people respond to a politician as much as they respond to the most charismatic person, or at least used to be the most charismatic person I've ever seen. Incredible the way people would respond to him. He was magnetic.
But I think the most courageous thing he's ever done, more courageous than knocking out Sonny Liston or George Foreman, is being willing to show himself now in public with his illness, which robbed him of the two greatest things he was famous for, his speech and wit and his speed, and not hide and not, become a recluse, but willing to be seen, knowing people want to cry for him and feel sorry for him, but he's at peace with himself.
Jack, I want to ask you a question, because my father actually was a booth fighter. You know what that means? A guy who comes out and fights anyone. And he was for a short period of time. And my nephew is a sort of an amateur boxer, and there's boxing in the family. My cousins in the north of Ireland were sort of in boxing professionally as well. I have a slight aversion, I have to say, to watching people smacking their...
So do I. That's below the level of real art.
And the difference between the amateur approach and the professional approach. How do you feel about people actually, well, brutalizing one another in the ring? And
I'm ambivalent every time I'm at a fight. I actually dislike the atmosphere around these big fights where a lot of, you know, criminals show up and pickpockets and dope dealers. I can appreciate boxing when it reaches the level of art. I mean, I don't know anything about ballet, but if I can see...
a ballet crowd came to a fight. I mean, that would really be peculiar.
what was the old thing about I went to a hockey match the other day,
fight broke out.
and a game broke out.
But what about the danger of somebody being
I have moments
like Muhammad Ali.
when Jimmy Garcia was killed in a fight 5 months ago. Gerald McClellan is now
And McGuigan killed a man as well, right?
Johnny Owen.
Yeah.
Lynn Cheney, jump in. You're worried about in high schools, in colleges, that kids are being taught a take on American history that has no basis in reality, that it's getting out of control. Can you talk about that?
An inaccurate version of the American past. We've gotten to the point where we have so little regard for what's true that we think we can teach whatever history is most politically and socially useful to us. And unfortunately, the people...
What are some flagrant abuses?
Well, I talk about the national history standards in my book, which present this incredibly grim and gloomy view of the American past, while looking at third world countries and making them appear quite spectacular places to live. The Aztecs, for example, are mentioned in the history standards for their glorious architecture and their wonderful irrigation systems and their complicated systems of trade. But it's never mentioned that they practiced human sacrifice. But any slight flaw, and even big flaws in American history, are blown so far out of proportion in comparison to the things we've accomplished. If you were to judge our history by these new history standards, you would think that Joseph McCarthy was the most influential American who had ever lived, because he's mentioned so often.
But you're really saying that there is a document floating around. This is what I gather from looking at your book and reading some of the materials surrounding it. There's a document floating around called the National History Standards.
This is correct.
That among other things, doesn't even mention George Washington being the first president or Madison in the Constitution, but focuses all their attention, or a lot of attention, on, say, the Ku Klux Klan.
Exactly. And we sure want our kids to know about the Ku Klux Klan.
Who's putting those things
Well,
together?
I helped make this possible. That's why I have spent so much of my last year denouncing it. In the last year of the
your role over at Humanities?
In the last year of the Reagan-Bush administration, a very responsible project was funded. It had a great application. It presented a paradigm of what it would do. It was going to be well-balanced, accurate. Lamar Alexander and I signed the documents, and 2 years later the standards came out, and they are completely appalling. But I've been lately comparing them to Rasputin. Everyone denounces them. You know, Rasputin, they tried to strangle him, they shot him, they dumped him in a river. He would not die. These standards will not die. I've denounced them. President Clinton, I understand, told Ben Wattenberg that he sure wasn't happy with them. Secretary Riley has denounced them. 99 senators have denounced them, and they're going into curricula in different states.
Well, now, do you get people feed you little stories from around the country? Say, we heard of a situation in a law class where, you know, a kid disagreed with the professor and was failed, or he was told that he couldn't, or that in a school system in Cleveland or Detroit or Washington that they were being taught something that isn't really true? Is that what you're saying, that this happens all the time?
Well, sure. It goes far beyond the national history standards. Fred once did a documentary with
Fred, you got a little defensive there for a minute.
No. This never aired, as I understand it, but I watched it, and they went to an inner-city school in Baltimore where Afrocentric education was taking place.
The stuff that was being taught there was amazing about melanin, and I'm sure you've heard much of this stuff, Tony. I mean, it was just not true, and I think it was counterproductive to tell these kids this stuff. I mean,
the kids were trying to, they were being taught how to write the alphabet that we use in this country in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Well, first of all, this is a big scam. You can't really do that. But these kids were being taught that when they should have been being taught their ABCs.
So you want to go back to basics and get rid of a lot of this
Well,
fancy
sure I
stuff.
do. I mean, but let us also be clear that the history that we learned 25 years ago in school was inaccurate in its own way. We didn't learn about women. We didn't learn about minorities, and we should learn that. But we've now got this crazy pendulum that's swung clear over to the other side.
Who said that history is the accepted lie?
Well, it shouldn't be.
The accepted lie?
Yeah.
What an interesting
Yeah.
question.
It was
huh?
Herodotus.
Huh?
No, somebody said that.
Napoleon said history is lies agreed upon.
Yeah, the accepted lie.
Or history is written by the winners. I mean, you can make all
Yeah.
of these cynical assessments of it, but the point is we shouldn't accept those
It's
assessments.
the people who teach it. And that's the way, when I was being taught in Ireland, we were always given an anti-British slant on our history as well.
Yes,
That kind of thing. And, I mean, when you grow up and you learn and you start to look at things in a different light, you see. And it was very biased. It was really very, very biased.
You learned a lot of great things about England that you didn't know.
I've learned it's actually worse.
Hey, is that monarchy, is that slowly fading out? I mean, did she just put the nails in the coffin, Princess Di there? I mean,
it's probably like the deep root of the Bosnia question.
Have you met those folks? Have you performed in front of them?
Yeah, I've met most of the royal family.
Well, tell us. I mean, what, are they nice people, or are
yes,
they just...
they are very, very nice people.
What's going on there?
I don't know. I just, they're normal people.
They're normal?
Yeah, I think they're
nice
normal
by
people.
what definition then?
Huh?
What kind of
Did
wacky
you,
definition
I mean,
was nice?
tell me
Nice
a
people to
story.
me.
Now,
I
when
don't
you
know them
meet
intimately.
Yeah, but what do they say to you? What do they say to you?
Let me speak, please. I met, you do things over there called the Royal Command Performance, and you do things called the Royal Variety Performance, and they come backstage and they meet you and have a chat. The first, in 1980, I did Jesus Christ Superstar in a city in England called Manchester, and Charles was there, and it was just before he got married, and he came backstage, and I was playing Judas, and he said, he's chatting away to me, and he said, "Who are you? Are you John the Baptist?" Well, I was John. No, I said, "Oh, no, I'm Judas, actually." And I'm not putting him down, but he did actually say that. So when we did Les Mis at the Barbican, he was married then, and Di came along to Princess Di came along to the opening, and they said, "You only have a minute to chat with her," and then, you know. So I couldn't resist. I said, "Well, I met your husband in Manchester, and I was talking to him. I was playing Judas in Jesus Christ Superstar, and he actually thought I was John the Baptist." That's just like him, actually. That's just like him. And then she used to come, actually, to the Les Miserables in London when we were there. She actually dropped in with him once, and she came with Fergie again. She was very, very big on she loved the show. He actually complained one time about saying that, he said, "I'm tired of listening to bloody tape." I met him once. He's playing a bloody tape all the time.
I one of those Meryl thinks that Diana is a good feminist heroine now. I mean, a lot of people are advancing this idea. How do you feel about it, that she's now proving herself to be strong and
I don't know. There's an interesting thing going on. It's another different version of a worldwide phenomenon. This whole confessional, everybody can tell everything about themselves and everyone can live with it kind of a thing. That kind of puzzles me. I mean, it's something that doesn't come natively to me, the idea of bearing all your inadequacies on a national scale. I don't know how you do that. You must have had a much more supportive family than I had.
Oh, I don't know.
Come to
I
that.
read your book last night. You are very revealing about going out on a
Not
date
on
with...
anything big.
a date with Fabio.
But are they not scrutinized so much by the press? And, you know, they don't live any type of private life at all.
We live in a new time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay now. Like, it's just an interesting phenomenon. And an additional one is the whole thing of the daytime talk shows and the way that all of Middle America has heard of seeing a shrink or a therapist at this point. I'm wondering what that's going to do to the whole culture. But just the fact that you would go on TV and talk about self-mutilation and so forth and assume that there'd be a certain level of acceptance for you.
But it
kind of
has. Her numbers have gone through the roof.
Yeah, no, it's a weird new, like, angle on things.
Would you not feel obliged?
Whatever you're confessing, they'll clap and cheer.
Yeah, but it just not that many years ago, the tiniest little crime would ruin a person's career forever.
Yeah, but it's one thing to have these weirdos come on and talk about sticking razor blades through their cheek or something, but then to have Lady Di come on and talk about her sex life. I mean, I think that means that culture, that as a guy who's written an article for...
Was that a little
for the
jab
magazine.
there, Lynn? Was that just a little partisan
Well, I mean,
jab?
That was a big jab. But
It was
it's
a big
No, it
jab.
wasn't
it's
a
the
jab. Fred and I are in the
Oprahization.
same
The
boat.
entire world.
A jab would have been he lied about his birth.
No, it's a jab. Now, I have to take care of a little bit of. I have to take care of a little bit of business, and you hold your thought. C-O-L-M, but pronounced
Colm.
Colm.
Yeah.
That's when I was watching you perform yesterday, and I just kind of wanted to get you going. I wanted to give you a little needle on the. When you're singing on stage now, 1,600 plus performances of Phantom in Toronto.
Yeah, well, 1,700.
1,700. The original presentation at a little festival of Phantom
Yeah,
of
I
the
was the
Opera.
original Phantom, yeah.
And then Les Mis.
I was contracted to do Les Mis, so I couldn't do Phantom.
I'm the only one sitting at the table who has Jekyll Hyde, the
Oh, yeah,
CD.
that's
And
good.
what a wonderful.
Oh,
Let me.
God.
But here is this man on stage yesterday. I mean, and I would say, I have said this to other people, so it doesn't make any difference that you're here. There are moments when you are working on that stage where it is as good as it ever gets.
Oh,
when,
thank you.
when the music and your voice and the song and the surroundings come together, no one can do it better.
Oh, thank you very much.
No one. It is just a
Glad to
stunning
be humble
performance.
now. Thank you.
No, folks should know that here in Washington, just for the next couple of days, Music of the Night is what they call it. There's a poster on the screen right now. It's the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber from, I guess, Jesus Christ Superstar up to Sunset Boulevard and everything in the
all
middle.
the big hits, yeah.
And he and a wonderful cast of 32 pieces on stage, 15 singers and dancers. The women are absolutely stunning,
Terrific, yeah.
And the men
It's a good show.
it's a good.
are stunning as well.
They are. Thank you very much. She's very political. I have been taken to task at this table
Let
today.
Dennis get away with
I
that.
have. Good for you, Lynn. I love having you at this table. You're going to be in Chicago, Florida, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Providence, Boston.
Detroit,
Yeah. So keep your eye.
Buffalo,
I mean, if you can get a ticket, you go. You run, you go.
Thank you very much.
It was just
Very
wonderful. You bring so much to our theater. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn Cheney, Telling the Truth, Why Our Culture and Our Country Have Stopped Making Sense and What We Can Do About It. Wonderful reviews. You have just stimulated our thinking in examining things like what's being taught in school, not only what's being taught in school, but how our politically correctness and our multiculturalism has gone into the law, has gone into corporate America, has gone into our politics. What's that funny line about Stephanopoulos? What did he say?
Oh,
what did he say?
When the president was criticized for having taken, I don't know, maybe his 6th or 7th stand on some crucial issue, and the press was going after George Stephanopoulos for this situation, Stephanopoulos accused the press of being guilty of an excess of literalism.
Tony Brown, so good to have you sitting at the table. 25 years. His public television talk show plays all over the country, and it is the longest-running public television talk show, I believe. You have made such a tremendous contribution to both public television and America over the years. Syndicated radio, syndicated newspaper column now, and also on the internet. And the new book, Black Lies, White Lies, The Truth According to Tony Brown, talking obviously about racism, victimization, take a hit at the black establishment leadership, sexism, Republicans, Democrats. You hold everyone up to a standard which is your standard, and we thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
I congratulate Fred Barnes, who folks know from McLaughlin and Crossfire and CBS this morning, for the new, and I want to make sure that people know about the Weekly Standard, brand new magazine. How many issues so
I
far?
think that's issue number 12. You can look inside and see it's 12 or 13. Lynn wrote for the first issue, actually, a great movie review.
It is a great magazine.
And so it's a conservative weekly magazine from Washington that I think is long overdue.
Well, I sat down and read as close to cover as I could last night to just savor some of the articles. This is a terrific publication. This is a real welcome addition, and you are executive editor, right?
I am. That's the only issue I haven't written a piece in.
Well, we
Maybe
won't
that's why
hold
you
that
liked
against
it.
you, though. We won't do it all.
Thank
Jack, Jack I've known for many years going back to Village Voice days, 24 years with the Village Voice, coming
Yes,
up
sir.
in New York. Only in America, The Life and Crimes of Don King by Jack Newfield, who is now, we should say, columnist with the New York Post.
Fred and I have the same boss now, Rupert Murdoch.
There you go. See, we bring people together at this table.
Yeah, we're wholly owned subsidiaries.
That's W-H-O-L-E-Y. Murder, jail time, all the great names in boxing, Muhammad Ali, Foreman.
My favorite line in the book is from Muhammad, where he said, Don King's body did 4 years in prison, but his hair got the chair.
Oh. You called Don King brilliant, devious, greedy, ruthless.
That's just in the first chapter.
Yeah. Now, Merrill Marco, we're so happy to have you here. I was on the telephone last night with my sister. We were laughing so hard about eating. There are 4 basic food groups. The title of the book is How to Be Happy Like Me. There it is on the screen right now. Eating, there are 4 basic food groups: salad, hors d'oeuvres, pasta, and diet drinks. Would you tell people about secondary weight gain and how that works?
Yeah, secondary weight gain is a situation in which if you are the sort of person who gains weight, you will just get fat no matter what you eat. And you will get doubly, and there's nothing you can really do about it. But if you're one of those sort of people and you eat with one of those kind of people who never gains weight no matter what they eat, and they're eating a lot of fattening food, the calories have to go somewhere, and it's like secondary smoke inhalation. You gain their weight for them. This is only a theory, mind you. I haven't really fully documented this, but I do believe it's true.
So if a person has a tendency to gain weight, is living with a thin person...
Right. You gain their weight.
Now, in this book, she's talking about, took a calendar and other self-help books on happiness, got out...
Yeah, I was just reading a lot of self-help books on happiness, and I was sort of overcome by the amount of ridiculous platitudes and no solutions to anything that they all represented, so I've just kind of used it as a format for my own book. Now, I have a question for the table. May I ask a question?
Yeah, but I want to ask, but I just want to ask you this. So if you say go out and go to a class, what class did you go to?
Oh, I went to a class on how to be a dominatrix, and you know I have a very nice side income from it now.
What's your question? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Is there any crime at this point in the United States of America